All right, you've seen the ads. DNA testing companies urging people to take a scientific look at where they came from. For many people who got DNA testing kits during the holidays, the results are starting to come in.
An island exists in the Bay of Bengal, not on any tourist map, not behind any visa restriction, just a wall of arrows and 40,000 years of silence. John Allen Chow crossed that wall in 2018. He brought fish, he brought a Bible, he brought hope. He never came back.
The 26-year-old dying at the hands of natives who were armed with bows and arrows. Authorities are now trying to determine if there's a way to recover his body.
But here's what no one tells you. The tribe that killed him is not just a story of isolation. Their blood carries a secret so ancient, so precise, that it is quietly rewriting everything scientists thought they knew about where you and I actually come from. The Sentinelese didn't just survive history, they recorded it inside their DNA. Stay with us. What we're about to reveal will change how you see humanity itself. The man who refused to leave. John Allen Chow was born in Alabama in 1991. He grew up reading adventure stories, the kind where brave men crossed jungles and oceans to find people no one had ever met. He did not just enjoy those stories. He decided at some point in his teenage years that he would become one of those men. He was not casual about it. He trained deliberately. He took wilderness survival courses. He studied linguistic anthropology, the science of how language works across cultures. He learned basic first aid. He practiced kayaking. He researched isolated tribes for years, reading every account he could find of people who had attempted contact with uncontacted communities. And somewhere in all of that preparation, he landed on a specific destination, North Sentinel Island. He had been thinking about it for a long time before he ever got on a boat. Friends who knew him said it was not a sudden decision. It was something he had been building toward for years, quietly and methodically, the way someone prepares for an expedition rather than an impulse. He applied for permits, he made plans, he prayed about it consistently. By the time he stepped into a kayak in November 2018, this was not an adventure. In his own mind, it was a calling. He listed Jim Elliot as one of his heroes. Elliot was an American missionary who traveled to Ecuador in 1956.
A man named Jim Elliot, a missionary, arrived in Ecuador with the purpose of evangelizing the Ecuadorian Indians. It's an amazing story, and there was actually a film made about these young men.
To make contact with the Huarani people, a tribe that had killed outsiders before and would do so again. Elliot knew the risk. He went anyway. The Huarani killed him on the banks of a river, along with 4 other missionaries. Chow knew this story in detail. He admired it anyway. He did not treat it as a cautionary tale. He treated it as a template. That detail, more than anything else, tells you something important about the kind of thinking that drove him. He was not unaware of what could happen. He had simply decided in advance that the outcome did not change the obligation. He called North Sentinel Island Satan's last stronghold. He wrote about it in his journals with a certainty that left no room for doubt or reconsideration. He believed God had called him specifically, not missionaries in general, not his organization, him, to bring the Christian gospel to the Sentinelese. The anthropology courses, it appears, did not cover the part about projecting your own belief system onto people who have no framework for it and no desire to acquire one. Or perhaps they did, and he set that part aside. In November 2018, he made his move. He paid local fishermen to take him by boat as close to the island as they were willing to go. They stopped well outside the exclusion zone. From there, he was on his own. On his first attempt, he kayaked alone to the shore. 2 Sentinelese men appeared on the beach, bows in hand. He threw them a fish. They did not shoot. He paddled back to the boat and wrote in his journal that the encounter felt encouraging. He had not been killed. He read this as an invitation. He came back the same day. This time, 6 men stood on the beach. He tried to speak to repeat sounds from their language back to them, words he had apparently picked up from somewhere, though no outsider has ever learned enough Sentinelese to hold a real conversation. His own journal records that they burst out laughing when he tried. He noted they were probably saying bad words or insulting him. That is genuinely the most relatable moment in this entire account, a room full of people laughing at someone mangling their language, is a universal human experience. Then a child drew a bow and fired an arrow directly into the Bible Chau was holding against his chest. Not an adult, not a warrior, a child. The arrowhead stopped at the cover. He swam a mile back to the waiting boat. He wrote in his journal that this felt like progress. Read that again. An arrow through his Bible, fired by a child, after men had stood on the beach with weapons drawn, and he concluded that things were moving in the right direction. The following morning, he went back a third time. His final journal entry is quieter than the ones before it. Does he ask God whether it would be wiser to leave and let someone else carry this forward? He sat with the question. Then he concluded it would not. He wrote a goodbye letter to his family. He asked them specifically not to try to retrieve his body if something happened. He folded the letter, left it on the boat, and paddled toward the island. The fishermen watching from a distance reported seeing the Sentinelese drag something along the beach later that day. They buried it in the sand. No one on the boat could tell exactly what it was from where they sat. They did not need to. Indian authorities subsequently arrested several fishermen for facilitating Chau's access to a protected zone. His father spoke publicly afterward and said that evangelical culture, the specific world Chau had grown up in, the books, the heroes, in the framework had pushed his son toward an end that almost everyone with knowledge of North Sentinel Island had explicitly predicted. The Sentinelese were not villains in this story. They were people on their own land, defending a boundary they had held for centuries, against an intruder who had been warned by the Indian government, by every historian who had written about this island, and by an arrow through a Bible, and who paddled back anyway. They did what they had always done. The only difference this time was that the world paid more attention. The island that fights back north. Sentinel Island does not look dangerous from above. Satellite images show a patch of dense green forest rising out of blue water, roughly square in shape, ringed entirely by coral reef. 60 square kilometers. There are two small peaks near the center that reach about 120 meters above sea level. From the air, it could be any tropical island anywhere in the Indian Ocean. Unremarkable, peaceful, the kind of place that shows up in travel photography with a sunset filter. From the water, it is a different story entirely. The coral reefs that circle the island have been wrecking ships for centuries. They are not a minor navigational inconvenience. They are a natural wall, irregular and unpredictable, sitting just below the surface in places where the water looks perfectly safe. Any vessel that gets too close without knowing exactly where the gaps are will end up broken on the reef. The 1867 wreck of the Nineveh proved that. Several other ships over the centuries proved it again. The reef does not care how experienced the captain is. It does not negotiate. Oh, the Sentinelese know where the gaps are. They have known for generations. They fish through them in narrow outrigger canoes, moving with the kind of precision that only comes from a lifetime of reading the same water. Every outsider who has ever arrived has had to figure the reef out the hard way, usually at significant cost to their vessel. The island sits about 40 kilometers from the main Andaman chain, close enough to see on a clear day, far enough to remain genuinely separate, not just geographically, but historically. Everything that happened on the neighboring islands over the past 2 centuries, almost none of it good for the people already living there, passed North Sentinel by entirely. The British came to the Andamans. They introduced diseases that collapsed communities that had survived for millennia.
British explorers kidnapped a group of Sentinelese in the late 1800s, and later some of them were killed by disease.
North Sentinel watched none of it. The reef and the arrows kept the 19th century at a distance. Nobody knows how many Sentinelese there are today. Population estimates range from 50 to 400 individuals. That gap is not a product of scientific uncertainty about birth rates or mortality statistics. It is a product of the fact that no one has ever been allowed close enough to actually count. Aerial surveys have captured images over the years, people standing on the beach, canoes moving through the shallows, children running between trees. The images consistently suggest a population that is healthy, well-fed, and physically active. Pregnant women have been spotted. Their technology is one of the most consistently misunderstood things about them. Older accounts use the word primitive with confidence. Their arrows are nearly as tall as the person firing them. Long, deliberately constructed, barbed just behind the tip in a design that serves double duty. The barb holds in fish. It also makes the arrow extremely difficult to remove from anything else it enters. Those tips were noted as iron by outside observers as far back as 1867. Not stone, not bone, iron. At a time when outside commentators were confidently categorizing the Sentinelese as a Stone Age people, they were already working with metal. They did not find iron ore deposits on the island. There is no evidence of smelting on North Sentinel. No furnace, no forge, no charcoal pits. What they did was considerably more practical. Shipwrecks have been delivering raw material to these shores for centuries. The Sentinelese learned to cold work salvaged metal, scoring the surface with hard stone flakes, bending and snapping the material into usable blanks, then grinding an edge with abrasive rock until it held a functional point. The entire process requires no heat. It requires understanding how metal behaves under stress, which angles to attack, how much pressure to apply before the material gives way cleanly, rather than cracking. Most people handed a piece of ship metal, and a rock would not produce a functional arrowhead. They would produce a bent piece of metal and a bruised hand. The Sentinelese produce arrowheads routinely, in a design refined over generations of use. That is not primitive. That is adaptive engineering, taking available materials, understanding their properties, and producing a reliable tool. The fact that the raw material arrives by shipwreck rather than by mining does not make the process less sophisticated. If anything, it makes it more impressive. Their canoes are narrow outriggers, steered with poles rather than paddles. The design limits range. These are not ocean-crossing vessels. They are built for shallow coastal water, which is exactly where the Sentinelese need to operate. The reefs surrounding the island hold fish in abundance. Turtles move through the shallows. Shellfish cover the rocks. The forest behind the beach provides birds and almost certainly wild boar. A British expedition in 1880 noted a substantial pile of boar skulls near a village on the island, which is either evidence of regular and successful hunting or the most unsettling garden feature in recorded history. In December 2004, when the Indian Ocean tsunami struck with almost no warning, the earthquake off the coast of Sumatra sent waves across the entire Bay of Bengal. Islands throughout the Andaman chain suffered casualties. The death toll across the region reached nearly 250,000 people. On North Sentinel Island, the two small peaks near the center, the ones that look unremarkable in satellite images, almost certainly saved lives. The elevation provided refuge when the water rose. But there is more to it than geography. Reports from Indian Coast Guard helicopters sent to check on the island after the tsunami described Sentinelese individuals on the beach, visibly alive and apparently unharmed, who responded to the helicopters by firing arrows at them, which under the circumstances is almost reassuring. A population that has just survived a catastrophic natural disaster and is still organized enough to respond to an unfamiliar aircraft with coordinated hostility is a population that is doing fine. The prevailing understanding among researchers is that the Sentinelese read the warning signs before the wave arrived the same way coastal communities around the world that maintain traditional ecological knowledge did. Changes in animal behavior, shifts in the sound of the water, the ocean pulling back before it came forward. Knowledge accumulated over thousands of years of living on and around the same body of water, passed down through generations in a place where nothing gets written down and everything gets remembered. 200 years of wrong decisions. The recorded history of outside contact with North Sentinel Island begins, when, as many colonial-era records do, with someone making a sensible decision for once. In 1771, John Ritchie of the East India Company was sailing through the Bay of Bengal when he noticed fires burning on the shore of a small forested island. He noted it in his log and kept moving. No landing, no investigation. Just a sailor who correctly read the situation and chose not to push it. No one was harmed. That outcome would not hold for long. For nearly 100 years after that, the island was largely left alone. Then in 1867, a merchant vessel called the Nineveh was caught in a monsoon and wrecked on the reef surrounding the island. All 86 crew members made it off the ship and onto the beach alive. For 2 full days, nothing happened. The crew survived on the beach, apparently unaware of exactly whose territory they were on. And on the third morning, they found out. Men appeared from the forest carrying bows, and the arrows that came with them were tipped with iron, which tells you something important. By 1867, the Sentinelese had already been working salvaged metal long enough that it had become their standard equipment. The Royal Navy arrived and extracted the survivors. Everyone lived. That particular story ended well. The next chapter did not. In 1880, a British officer named M.V. Portman arrived at North Sentinel with a large expedition. Portman held an official position overseeing the Andaman Islands and had a range of personal interests unusual enough to deserve their own separate examination. What matters here is what happened when his team encountered a Sentinelese family in the forest. They captured them. An elderly man, a woman, and 4 children were taken from the island and transported to Port Blair, the main colonial settlement on the Andaman chain. The 2 adults died almost immediately. Their immune systems, never exposed to mainland diseases, had no framework for what they encountered in a colonial port town. The 4 children were kept for a period and then returned to the island with gifts. Those children almost certainly carried diseases back with them. Portman later wrote in his own journal that the entire expedition had accomplished nothing except increasing the general terror of outsiders. That sentence, coming from the man who ordered the kidnapping, is a remarkable piece of self-awareness, arriving several months too late to be useful. In 1896, an escaped convict from the Port Blair prison drifted to the island on a makeshift raft. A search party arrived shortly after and found him on the beach, dead, with multiple arrows in his body. After that, the island was left largely alone for the better part of 50 years. The lesson appeared, finally, to have landed. It had not landed permanently. Through the latter half of the 20th century, the Indian government made several contact attempts, some of them surprisingly gentle by historical standards, involving coconuts left on the beach and careful observation from a distance. On a handful of occasions, Sentinelese individuals appeared to accept gifts without immediately firing. These moments were interpreted as openings. They were not openings. They were moments of cautious assessment followed, on subsequent visits, by more arrows. The Indian government eventually settled on what officials describe as an eyes-on, a hands-off policy. Periodic checks from a safe distance confirm the population appears healthy. No landings, no contact attempts, a 3 nautical mile exclusion zone enforced by law. John Allen Chow violated that exclusion zone in 2018 with the help of paid fishermen. The result was entirely consistent with 200 years of recorded history. What the blood remembers. While every boat that approached North Sentinel Island was being turned back by arrows, a completely different kind of investigation was underway on the neighboring islands of the Andaman chain. No boats went to North Sentinel. No contact was attempted. No one had to risk anything. Scientists were working with skeletal remains found across the archipelago, old bones from archaeological sites on islands where contact had been made, however disastrously. From teeth and inner ear bones, where genetic material survives the longest, they were extracting ancient DNA and sequencing what remained. The Andamanese people, including, almost certainly, the Sentinelese as the most isolated population in the group, carry ancestry that traces directly to some of the earliest modern humans to leave Africa. Not to modern South Asian populations, not to modern East Asian populations. Something older and more direct. A lineage that does not connect neatly to any mainland group because it predates the migrations that eventually created those groups. Estimates place their ancestral line on these islands at over 40,000 years. To put that in terms that are easier to hold in your head, agriculture was invented roughly 10,000 years ago. The Bronze Age began around 3,300 BCE. The Roman Empire rose and fell. The Mongol Empire rose and fell. Every dynasty in Chinese history rose and fell.
In the 12th century CE, before the Mongol Empire formed, the East Asian steppe was home to scattered groups of Mongol and Turkic pastoral nomads led by Khans.
Every European kingdom you have ever studied was built, collapsed, and was forgotten. Through all of it, the Andamanese were on these islands, fishing the same reefs, working the same forest, doing what they had always done. Now here is the part that genuinely surprises people. Their physical appearance, darker skin, certain facial features led generations of outside observers to make confident and completely wrong assumptions about where they came from. Colonial administrators, early anthropologists, even some scientists looked at the Andamanese and drew conclusions based on what they saw. Those conclusions were wrong in almost every meaningful way. Darker skin near the equator is not a marker of African ancestry. Oh, it is what happens when any human population lives under intense equatorial sunlight for enough generations. It evolved independently multiple times across human history in populations that have no close genetic relationship to each other. It is an adaptation to an environment, not a record of descent. Genetically, Andamanese people are far more closely related to East Asian populations than to any African group. The physical appearance and the DNA are pointing in entirely different directions. Science spent a long time following the appearance. Once it followed the DNA, the picture changed completely. What the DNA shows is a population that has been sitting on these islands since before the major migration waves that eventually shaped the rest of Asia. Those later waves carrying different genetic signatures are moving through different corridors spread across the mainland and largely replaced or absorbed whoever the first wave had left behind. But the Andaman Islands were offshore, accessible only by open water. The people already there were not absorbed. They were not replaced. Their genome retained a signal that everywhere else was overwritten by later arrivals. The Sentinelese, as the most isolated population of the group, cut off not just by water, but by their own consistent and effective resistance to contact, may have preserved that signal more completely than anyone else on the planet. Every outsider turned away, every disease kept out, every genetic exchange prevented. The isolation that looks from the outside like stubbornness or aggression turns out to have been the most effective preservation strategy in human history. Not by design, just by outcome. The route nobody expected. For most of the 20th century, scientists thought they understood how modern humans left Africa and spread across the planet. The model was straightforward. Early humans moved northeast out of Africa, passed through the Middle East, entered Central Asia, and gradually fanned out across the Eurasian landmass. A slow expansion over tens of thousands of years, moving inland, following large game, settling river valleys and open plains. That model is not wrong, but it is incomplete in a way that matters enormously. The genetics kept pointing towards something that happened earlier, faster, and along a route that the inland model cannot explain. Ancient DNA from populations in South Asia, Southeast Asia, Papua New Guinea, and Australia showed a shared ancestry that did not fit neatly into the timeline of the inland dispersal. The signal was too old. The populations were too far apart. Something had moved people from Africa to Australia at a speed and along a path that crossing a continent on foot simply could not produce. The southern coastal dispersal hypothesis is the answer that the evidence keeps pointing toward. The proposal is this. The first wave of modern humans out of Africa did not head inland. They followed the coast. They moved through the Arabian Peninsula, tracked the shoreline of South Asia, pushed through Southeast Asia, and island hopped across the chain that leads toward Australia. They were not plains people. They were coastal people fishing, collecting shellfish, moving fast along the edge of the ocean, using the sea as a road. The speed this route allowed is the key point. A coastal population with reliable access to marine food sources can move far faster than a group crossing grassland or forest. The ocean edge is a highway. The evidence suggests modern humans may have reached Australia as early as 65,000 years ago, tens of thousands of years before the inland route could have delivered them. The Andaman Islands sit directly in the middle of that proposed path, right where coastal migrants moving east from South Asia would have passed. And the Andamanese genome carries exactly the genetic signature you would expect from a population descended from that first coastal wave ancestry that predates the later migrations that filled the Asian mainland, preserved on islands that those later migrations never reached. When ancient DNA from Aboriginal Australians and Papuan populations shows the same deep shared ancestry with the Andamanese. The biological fingerprint of that early coastal dispersal, visible at opposite ends of its reach. A genetic thread running from the Bay of Bengal all the way to the Torres Strait, documented not in any artifact or ancient text, but in the DNA of living people and of bones pulled from the ground of islands in between. The Sentinelese sit at one end of that thread, the most intact surviving node of an entire ancient network, a population that has been on those same islands since before the coastal dispersal was even complete. Never absorbed, never replaced, never diluted by the waves of movement that reshaped everyone else. The arrows that have kept every outsider at a distance for all of recorded history have, entirely by accident, preserved something that scientists would otherwise give almost anything to study properly. The people the world spent 2 centuries trying to contact may be carrying the clearest biological memory of how the human world was first built. There is something quietly extraordinary about that. History does occasionally have a sense of irony. The Sentinelese will never know that their DNA is rewriting textbooks on the other side of the planet. They do not need to. They were working salvaged iron into arrowheads long before anyone thought to extract meaning from ancient bones. They were fishing these reefs when every civilization we study in school had not yet started. They have survived every wave, colonial, scientific, a missionary that tried to reach them. The arrows that kept the world away accidentally preserved the clearest biological record of where the world came from. Some questions are worth leaving unanswered. Some people have already told you loudly, consistently, for centuries exactly what they want. If this story made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. We will be back with the next one.